Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Whiteboard Wednesdays with Vanna. And we're continuing our discussion with Rudolph. We've touched on the kind of geopolitical influence, supply chain. We've touched on the impact of all of this on security in terms of cybersecurity. And now we're going to look at, today we're talking about sovereignty and the alignment of South African-based organizations, which is potentially being drawn into question, and our dependencies on technologies that come from East and West, and this is not to there's no political kind of view or anything. We're just looking objectively at the realities of where technology comes from, how our organizations use technology, and how the geopolitical situation is impacting this from a governance and safety perspective.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in the market at the moment, and I think one of the key things that I always look at is, and where you can get a good kind of barometer for things, is if you look at kind of the European markets as well, the European countries, because they're kind of stuck also in the middle between the East and West, same as us.
Yeah.
Except they've got, I think, more closely aligned kind of treaties with the Western world than that we traditionally have. But even on that side, if you look at the European countries, there's a concerted effort for them to lessen their reliance on US-based organizations.
Dependencies,
100%. So they've got, there's been a lot of media attention on the fact that a lot of European government institutions are moving away from Office 365, for example. There's a lot of focus on moving out of the US hyperscalers or lessening the dependence on the US hyperscalers. And this is not about brand or anything like that. It's not about bashing anything. It's not even around the technology side per se. It's just around the risk associated with that, with the way that we mentioned in the previous podcast as well, that weaponization of tariffs and trade. So all of that uncertainty means you have to kind of focus to become more self-reliant, and that's where the sovereignty side comes in.
Yeah, I mean, previous episode you spoke about the concept of a minimum viable organization, right? And re-looking at your postures and these things from a strategic perspective, where your dependencies and what are you relying on, right? So if you bring in all of these factors and you kind of start looking at it from all these different lenses, right? Your sovereignty, your dependency, what constitutes that minimum viable organization? Is there certain things that you start taking more in-house again? What's your dependency on certain technology, and what's that impact, right? So it is a risk discussion.
So kind of my recommendation when I speak to customers is usually around, you have to keep control over your main application stack. So what allows the business to operate? Kind of to be a little bit facetious, is what's the money-making app? What drives business organization?
Yes, why are you relevant?
Why are you relevant?
What's your why are you relevant?
If that application goes down, you can't service your customers.
Correct.
And it is focusing on getting that application in-house, where you have control over it. There's no external party that can flick the switch, that can switch it off, that can do anything to that application. If something happens to that application, you walk down to your IT guy and say, fix this or you're fired.
And I think that's the
it's
thing.
Like, it's not phoning a call center, and we are experiencing high call volumes. Please stay on the line type of situation. So it's that making sure that you have control over those key data assets, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, the locus of control in terms of minimum viable organization, risk benefits or risk factors impacting that. And that can take different forms, right? You mentioned about, bringing things in-house. But when we look at sovereignty, right, that picture can be executed in quite a few different ways, right? So, obviously we want to be protected in terms of governance. So you might consider things like not being subject to non-South African organizational laws or
Yeah,
company laws
100%.
or extradition in terms of data extradition or anything like that. You want to be, kind of legally bound to the sovereign entity of your
Yeah,
organization's holding and your suppliers as well, right? That
yeah,
extended supply chain as well. So, in-house,
yeah.
can be quite a
Different.
yeah, it could be direct control over the infrastructure application stack, which is one thing. But in terms of the governance and your supply chain,
Yeah,
that could also be in-house or localized in
100%.
various ways, right?
Yeah, so I think too, one of your points is just around that situation where you have corporate data or you have your corporate data assets subject to international legislation. Now, something that's been highlighted quite recently as well, and that's one of the reasons why Europe is looking to lessen their reliance on the US hyperscalers, is with the US Cloud Act.
Mm.
Now, it all seems fine if you've got the US Cloud Act, which says the US government can look at any data that resides within a cloud environment under the control of a US organization.
Mm.
Now, that all seems good if everybody's friendly and everything is calm and relaxed and things like that. But with all the kind of upheavals we've had lately, that becomes a concern. And there's significant kind of a disparity and a clash between, if you look at GDPR legislation in Europe versus the Cloud Act around how do you protect personal information. And the same with the South African environment. We've got POPIA, which is based on GDPR.
Yeah.
And POPIA as well, the US Cloud Act and POPIA are, there's no kind of overlap between the two. They're like...
They're not even considering each other.
No, they're not considering each other. And there's a massive clash of interest between the two. And it's kind of focusing on those things to say that, look, but you were saying that sovereignty and the governance side, and it's taking those things into account to say that, do we have it in a sovereign environment where there is no external factors that can have access to this, and where we can control who looks at it, who's access to it, and how do we protect it? And that's the other key thing, is people think hyperscalers are immune to cyber attacks, and unfortunately,
even physical disruption.
even
I think
physical
we saw what
disruption.
happened now with AWS's data centers actually getting damaged and destroyed in some cases.
100%. So
It's real.
So making sure that whatever is in place stays in our sovereign environment, which is kind of the borders of South Africa, but not just the borders of South Africa, under the control of South African organizations.
Correct. And I mean, one thing I found very interesting in doing some research is that, international politics is and economical drivers is a very, very murky thing, right?
Yeah.
And very difficult to define. Because, you might say, well, South Africa is aligned in part of this BRICS thing and, all of that type of story. But technically, what you actually have is that Saudi Arabia, Iran, and all the UAE states are also part of BRICS.
Yeah.
And they're busy blowing each other up, right?
Yeah,
So
100%.
so you can't rely on these definitions or
No,
these treaties in
100%.
place. You have to take a different view onto this, or take into consideration that there's factors way beyond our control that's
100%.
driving these things. Yeah.
And looking at the whole BRICS thing versus the AGOA and all of these things that you see in the news, it's also very key to not have all your eggs in one basket. And I think that's one of the things, is also looking at that east-west and starting building that dual supply chain, where you can actually make sure that if one supply chain closes down or if something happens, you never know what happens in the future. So if there's additional tariffs or whatever happens, you need to make sure that you've got these two pathways to deliver systems to business.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. The three parts that we've looked at, the supply impact, the security impact, and the sovereignty impact. And from a strategic perspective, navigating the next moves that organizations make to stay resilient as the uncertainty intensifies with the situation we're seeing. It is prudent to have these discussions and to be able to look. It is interesting, and we might be doing some follow-ups on this type of
100%.
topic if our viewers are interested in this. But Rudolf, thank you so much for joining us. Always insightful.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah,
and to everyone else, thank you for joining.
Yeah. And as always, we're here to help. So if any of our customers want to reach out, if anybody wants some additional conversations, we're happy to assist.
Absolutely. We just reach out to us.